Okay, I want to give you your last tutorial for project 3, which is actually due next week. So we don't have a tremendous amount of time to be creating this 3D environment, but I think given the tools that we already have to work with, we should be able to create something interesting and intricate enough to then maybe use as a scene in your final project, perhaps. So I've decided instead of getting into Cinema 4D for this project, we'll just still be working with 3D capabilities using 2D shapes and layers rather than also introducing 3D forms. That's something I'll introduce for in the final weeks and something you can maybe play around with and incorporate into your final project. So what I've done here is I've created in Illustrator a landscape view that I will use as my 3D environment. And we have the same artboard size here, that preset, film and video preset of 1280 by 720. And what I've done is I've extended my landscape far beyond those bounds of the camera's frame. And so what I'm going to do is import this now into After Effects. And let me just show you my layer list here. I've labeled everything, and I've created all of these different assets on different layers so that I'm able to manipulate their position in the Z space, and then you'll see what kind of effect we can generate that way. So I'm in After Effects now. I'm going to double click in my project panel to import my footage. And here I have this in a, let me go ahead and actually save this file first. So I'll save this as this project, and I will put it in this environment demo, and I will say project 3, perhaps, and then double clicking in this project panel here, I'm going to import my landscape that I've created. So now it's really important to bring this in as composition retained layer sizes. This is because if I bring it in just as a composition, it's going to crop. It's going to crop to fit the artboard, and I want to retain all of that information that extends beyond the artboard. So composition retain layer sizes, and then do not bring in this PDF sequence. We don't need that. We just want to create a composition, retain layer sizes, and that's it. Hit open. And now if I double click, I have my composition's been created, and now I have all of my Illustrator layers here in my layer list. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is, this is named wrong, let me rename this. Is I'm going to select all my layers, and then I'm going to go up to Layer and Create, or I can right click and say Layer, Create Shapes from Vector Layer. Okay, so again here, Create Shapes from Vector Layer. Okay, so now I have all of my shape layers created, and I can go ahead and delete my Illustrator layers, and I'm just command selecting all the Illustrator layers here, and I'm going to delete them. And now what I'm going to do is transform all of these into 3D layers. And the reason why, let me show you first. If I just deal with these as 2D layers, let's say I want to pan across my whole scene. Let me actually put a background in first. I'm going to create a new solid. I kind of like this yellow. And let me put this in the background of my scene. Okay, so now I have a kind of sunny day. And the best way to pan across a scene is, rather than I could create a camera in the scene and move the camera, but another way I could do it so that I have more control over my camera is to create a null object. So I'm going to, again, right click here, and I'm going to create, let's see, I need to double click, create new. I need to not be selecting a layer when I do it. I need to be in kind of the empty space here, or I need to go up to Layer, New. And I'm going to create a null object. And a null object is just an empty layer with nothing in it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select not my not my background, because my background I wanted to stay static, but all of my shapes, I am going to shift select them all, and I'm going to parent them to that null object. Okay, so now what I can do is if I press P and open up my position information, I'm going to set a key, and let's actually move this layer over. And then let's say 10 seconds in, I'm going to move this entire null object to the left. And so my camera's staying stationary and in position, but I'm just moving my layers by parenting all of them to this null object. And there's that kind of outside edge of that one mountain range, so I'll end it there. And now let me kind of zoom in here so we can see. And now we're kind of panning across the scene. So this doesn't look great, and the reason is because for so much distance between the front trees and that back mountain, we should see them moving at different speeds. You know, the farther you are away from something, the slower it seems to move. And the closer things are to you, they appear to go by faster. So we need to kind of recreate that effect. And by using 2D layers, you know, we have this kind of like flat, everything moves across the screen at the same speed. So by utilizing 3D, we're able to recreate that effect of maintaining a kind of sense of distance between these objects. And we have a more realistic motion as we go by. So we can see that everything's moving uniformly, these back mountains and these trees at the same time. And so it appears really, really flat. So what I'm going to do now is I'll leave my null object will be a 2D object, but all my other objects besides my, and not my background. My background I will leave as a 2D object, and the null will also be left as a 2D object. But all the other objects will make 3D. And I will go to my, we'll still stay in one view, but we'll go to our custom view here. Custom view 3, I kind of like this view. And what I want to do is choose one mountain range. Maybe this frontal mountain range will stay at the zero Z position. And everything else I'm going to adjust according, like move it forward and move it back in space. So let me go to all of my shapes now. Forget the null. I'll toggle that. I'll twirl that back up. And I'm going to select all of my other layers here and hit P. So I can access now, since they're 3D layers, I have this Z axis information. And so what I'll do is I'll start with mountain range 4, which is this front mountain range. And I'll leave that at 0. And then what I'll do is I will select the one directly behind it, or yeah, so we have, if this is 0, I'll move them back at like 50 pixel increments. So I have mountain range 4 at 0, mountain range 3 will be at 50, mountain range 2 at 100, and mountain range 1 at 150. So let me go ahead and just type those values in. And now we'll see these move back in space. So we'll move these trees up to negative 100. These trees. I want to look at this from my front view maybe. I'll move these trees up negative 50. I have these 3 trees here, so I'll do negative 100. And then trees 4, negative 50. And the same thing for this lonely tree on the left here, negative 50. Okay, so now let's take a look. I'm in my front view here. So I don't see my background. Let's go back to our active camera so you can see that yellow in the background. And now let's see what this looks like with our keys. I might have to process. But you should be getting a sense that the front layers are moving at a faster speed than the background layers. And this will give a more realistic impression to your scene. There's some other tweaking that I'd like to do, because as we moved layers back in space and forward in space, their scale became distorted. And I'd also like to maybe adjust some of the scale. I'd also like to work a little bit with depth of field, which I'll get into once this is done processing and we can kind of preview it. Like you can see there, I have that one shape layer of the mountains. We see the layer's edge, the shape's edge, and I'd like to adjust for that and stretch that out. Okay, now we can preview this faster since it's been cached. Now you can see that the trees in the front are moving faster than the trees in the back, and the mountains in the front are moving faster than the mountains in the back. Okay. So there's a couple ways that we can exaggerate this, and also, because right now I'm just using the active camera, that's the default camera in the scene. The first thing that I know I want to do is I want to open up this back mountain, and I want to scale it. So if I go to the S key, if I hit S on my keyboard, I have scale, and now I can make this a lot bigger. That's probably too big. There we are. That'll get it right to that outside edge. And I think also that some of my trees, I'd like to move their positions up. Since they're closer to me now, they are below the bottom of the frame. So I will select them all and then together move them up. And this will give a better effect if I also take this first mountain range here and maybe move that down. Let's move this one down a little bit. Because now that I've animated some motion, now I'm able to just visualize what this scene actually looks like with the motion in it. And so I'd like to make some adjustments here to its overall appearance. And what I'm doing is creating a little bit of play between some of these trees in the back mountains by moving these tree line up a bit. I think for this one, I might move it up even more. Let's see. Okay. And maybe I'll move these trees over a little bit. Like that. And now let's try that. Now it'll take a while. It'll take a little bit of time to process. And then we can preview this. This background, again, needs to be This time what I'll do is for this mountain range, this back one, mountain range 1, and I did change the scale of it, but I might just pull it out a bit from the side. So I've unlinked all of the scale attributes, and now I'm just gonna stretch it. Okay. So now let's take a look at what this looks like. Deselect it in the scene. Oh, and again, a little bit. And now let's see what this looks like. I'm just going to select the null so that you can see a motion path has been created there. Let's go ahead and press play. I think the second mountain range I'll move up. It seems to be like right at that tip of the background. Or I'll move the background down, I'm not sure. But now you can really see that the trees in the front are moving faster than the background layers. And this is a subtle difference, but I think it makes I think it'll make a lot of, it's a small change that makes a pretty big difference. Okay, so now we can scrub back. And preview this. So I said there are some things that can really exaggerate this. And one of them is the camera itself. So right now I have I'm going to create a new camera. And the default here is this 50mm lens. Let's go ahead and create that in the scene, right? And so you'll see as we're looking through our active camera, which is camera 1 now, we have the same kind of distance. Let me go ahead and change the position of this a little bit. I said I wanted to move it up. Okay. Let me script back. Okay. And so now that camera is the type of camera. Let's create a different camera. And I'm going to create a new camera. And this time I'll make it a 20mm lens. Okay. And you can see here that the focal distance is a lot shallower than at the 50. And so what this does is this creates the effect of the kind of smaller the lens, the farther away things appear over the same amount of distance as a larger lens. So you have this sense of kind of collapsing of space with the larger lens, you have a wide angle lens here, and then you have a kind of telescoping lens, meaning that the lens is smaller, and so things appear to have a greater sense of depth between them. Let's show you what this means. I'm going to go ahead and create this camera 2 in the scene. Now let's look through camera 2. And you can even see just in that slight shift, right? Let's look at 2 views, horizontal views. And in this section, we'll look at camera 1. And you can already see, zoom in on it here. Let's pull both of these cameras out so you can kind of see the edges a little bit. I'm going to open up the positions for both of these cameras. Let's change this to 25%. Okay. And now what I'll do is I'm going to just move the distance of these cameras back. And you can see here, camera 2 is at is 700 pixels away. Camera 1, which is the 50 millimeter, is 1700 pixels away. So let's back this up even more. I'm going to actually just type a value in. Negative 2200. And then we should see some of those edges. And let's do the same here. I'll pull this back. Negative 900. And you should be able to see that camera 1, which I'd like to really get rid of that bounding box, but camera 1 here, you can see that these are all, this is a 50 millimeter, right? We can see that these are all kind of at the same distance, whereas here we can really see that we can see the distance between each layer. So what does this look like? Let's go back to our single view. And let's zoom in here. And this is now camera 2. Let's go to camera 1, which is what we had previewed before. Okay, and actually I need to zoom out. I need this to fit up to 100%. Okay, and now let's play through this. And since I've moved the cameras back, so our cropping is all messed up. But let's just play through this, and then we'll compare it to the 20 millimeter lens. Okay, so let's compare this motion to this motion. Okay, so we'll compare that to this. And the motion is, and the difference, the depth of field is much exaggerated between the two. So there's one last thing that we can look at here when it comes to working with depth and cameras. And what I would suggest is if you want to utilize depth of field, and this will give the illusion of kind of focusing on a particular layer and then blurring the other layers around it. I would really recommend using the smaller lenses. So the 20 millimeter lens we'll use. And I'm going to open up my camera options here. And it's something that you can find under, when you create the camera, you can enable depth of field right here. It's already enabled. And so here you see it on, or I can turn it off within the camera itself, also the camera's options. And just so you can get a sense of this, right now the focus distance, the depth of field is on. And so the focus distance is the same as the zoom. So I can actually turn this, if I put this out to 0, right, everything's super blurry. And I'm just gonna start to move this back. Right now we start to have some things, they're still super blurry, but come into focus a little bit. Let's go to maybe 400 pixels back and even 500 pixels. And you don't get so much of a sense, you get a little bit, you know, maybe these front trees now, being that they are 100 pixels in front of the 0 origin of the Z space, which is what the zoom is attached. So the camera is 711 pixels back in space, and it's focused on the kind of origin, the 0, 0 in the Z direction, which is what this this first closer mountain range is, and these trees are, again, like 50 to 100 pixels in front of that. So if I want the focus to be on the trees, I might bring those up to like 650 pixels. So my focus distance, I have to do a little bit of math here to see, but we don't really see so much of a sense of blurring happening. I have to kind of increase, I'll either have to increase the depth dramatically and adjust for all of that, or I can increase this blur level. So if I increase it to like 300, you should see now this background will become more blurred. So I'm blurring. So I can do this 2 ways. It can be a combination. And I'm going to show you this again. Let's make this like 600 pixels so that these trees are really in focus. There we go. We're getting them more in focus now. So we have, if I increase the blur level, I see that the background is more blurry than the foreground. I can also change that. I can make the background in focus and the foreground blurry. Let's increase this maybe 1100, right? And now this becomes more blurred and these become more sharp. So this is a way that you can, you know, add some more interest and level of realism to your environment. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is to create a kind of motion path with your camera. And what I've done is I've just made a shape layer here with this house, just 2 rectangles. What I'd like to do, the first thing I'd like to do for this layer here is actually center the content. I made it a 3D layer, and I'd like to center this, the anchor point over the content. So the way I'm going to do that is layer, transform, and center anchor point and layer content. And what that does is that will center it, which is just makes it easier to manipulate rather than have it centered in the composition panel in the middle. Okay, and now I'm going to go layer new, and I'm going to create a camera. And for this, I'm going to actually create a 15mm camera just to create even more sense of depth between my layers. And my active camera now should reflect my camera 1. Right? And there we see it. And now what I'm going to do is kind of create a little neighborhood, a very basic neighborhood of just this one shape, house shape. And we're going to kind of pan through the neighborhood. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up the P position here. And I am going to create this house and kind of move it forward here. That. And I'm just going to copy and paste this house a couple times, open up its P position. I want to maintain a sense of ground, but I will kind of move these farther back, copy, paste, open up the position by pressing P here. Move this farther back, paste. Move this farther back, paste. We'll just do this a couple times here. Move this farther back and move it over. right? And so now I'm getting, what I can do is I'm going to actually shift select all of these houses now and move them all back even farther. No, I don't want all of my houses. Okay. There we go. I'll move the second set back again. Okay. So I have a kind of neighborhood situation. And this is just to give a sense of moving through space along the Z. And now what I'll do is I will open up my, let's look at my camera. And the cameras I've been working with for this tutorial have just been 1-node cameras, not 2-node cameras, where you can also have that point of interest. This camera is just a 1-node camera. And so under my transform options here, I don't have a point of interest. I just have its position. And so that's fine for now. What I'm going to do is let's keyframe the position here. And then I think in this top view, what I'll do is I will do it manually. I will just pull. I guess it won't let me. I'm going to just drag through the scene. And I think I have some houses that are kind of in the way. I'm just going to drag through the scene here. So now I can see, I created that neighborhood and I've created this motion path. You can see the motion path of the camera through my top view. You can see this little white line, and this shows you the motion path. What I'd like to do now is actually move some of these houses that are kind of in the way, these two. And let me open up their positions here, and I'm just going to move them over so they're not in the motion path of my camera. Maybe move them back a little bit. And now let's preview. Let's get a preview of what this looks like. And so now I'm like moving through the Z space with the camera. And what we can see too is maybe we can turn on depth of field, which it should already be on, but maybe what we'll do is have the focal distance. Let's zoom in. Let's turn on the blur level, turn that up. All right, so now you can really see blur. And let's keep the depth of field actually just right at 100. Let's see what that looks like. Too blurry. Aha, there we go. And now this is, because it gives a real different kind of sense where we have really blurry background, and as the objects come closer, they become more in focus. And now what I wanted to show you just quickly, the last thing is we can, let's go to a single view here. And let me select my camera so I can see this motion path. I'm able to adjust this motion path. If I click on P, I'm able to use, I have these handles, and I can manipulate the shape of this path by changing the handles. So I can basically manipulate the curve here of my motion path by utilizing these handles. So let's see what that looks like. So I can create a motion path, and then just like as if it's a shape itself, I'm able to manipulate what this looks like. I can do it also in the graph editor. This right now I'm working in the speed value, but if I go to, or the speed graph, but if I go to the value graph, right, this is that shape that I just created in the X direction. So let's go and look at this through my active camera again. And now I'm kind of going through some of those houses, that one house, but we get a different kind of motion that's going along that path. So those are some of the ways in which we can animate through a 3D scene. and some of the other camera options that we can start to manipulate. In order to give us our kind of desired effect of creating a 3D environment.